Friends, this is episode 896 of the Juicebox Podcast. Welcome to it. Today I'm going to be speaking with Edward. He is a type 1, he's a father, and he's a computer programmer who uses Android APS to give himself insulin. And he's got a lot of cool thoughts about it. It's a lot to do with where things could be going, where they are going. It's incredibly interesting. You're going to be daunted at first by the length of this episode. Don't be. Just settle in, listen to the conversation unfold, and imagine what could be. While your imagination is running wild, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. Here's a couple quick things. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Go complete the survey. You're going to help diabetes research if you do that. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. You can get 10% off your first month of therapy at betterhelp.com/juicebox. And you can save 35% on your entire order at cozyearth.com by using the offer code juicebox at checkout. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by US Med. Get your diabetes supplies the same way we do from US Med. usmed.com/juicebox. Why would you go there? It would be to get your free benefits check and to get started. Don't like the internet? Call 888-721-1514. Get started today with US Med. They always provide 90 days worth of supplies. And they have fast and free shipping. The podcast is also sponsored today by Touched by Type 1. Now, I'm going to be speaking at the next Touched by Type 1 big event. It's coming up soon. Check it out, touchedbytype1.org. Also, find them on Facebook and Instagram.
So I am Edward Robinson. I am a father of 4 children. I am a computer programmer. And I was diagnosed with diabetes at age 18 in 2006.
How old are you now?
34.
2006. And you're 34. Okay. 4 kids.
Yes.
Is that, are you doing that for Jesus?
It's a lot of work.
Or what are you building an army, a basketball team? What's going on exactly?
So I was one of 4. My wife was one of 3. And so we always wanted to have a few kids, and it's turned out to be 4.
Wow. Well, you did it. Is there like a hole in your floor somewhere where you just keep pouring money to send the kids to college with later? Or is that how that works?
No, I just go back to work and work more.
Are you prepping them now? Because they're young, I imagine, right? What are their ages?
They are young. So the oldest is 7. Then 5, then almost 3, and then 1. Almost 1.
I'd be whispering in their ear, you want to be a short order cook? Someone has to pick up the recycling, Billy. Like, come on, buddy. You don't need college. I don't know, man. That's, have you ever thought about it?
Yes. Yeah. We started 529s for them quite early.
Well, I bet you did. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, congratulations.
No birthday presents, just donations to 529s, please.
Daddy,
we'll just go to the park and save the money.
Yeah. I want a lollipop. You'll take this quarter, you run home, you put it in the hole in the floor. Just shut up. My God. I mean, listen, an expensive education at this point, private education, is $65,000-$70,000 a year, right?
Yeah. And I can only imagine what it's going to be in.
I have to tell you, there was an amount of money that my wife and I imagined when Cole was born, and we were wrong by 130%, maybe. So, I mean, maybe things will change, but seriously, I'd be like, there's no reason. Somebody runs the cash register at Target, and I think you'd be great at it. And I would just get them a nice blue collar job. Although, what kind of work do you do?
So I am a software developer. I work for a small consulting firm.
Do you teach them how to code? Are you like, sit down, I'll show you Python today? Like, what do you do with those kids?
No, so like I actually build the application. So we work with different clients, and then they have different problems that they want to solve, and we'll work with them to solve their problems. It almost always involves building applications,
No kidding.
but sometimes it's just like management help or helping them solve their process problems and things like that. But usually there's applications involved. And recently, I've been working on a project for artificial intelligence and machine learning,
Wow. So if I
which
said,
is really exciting.
that's amazing, actually. I'm going to hear more about that in a second. If I asked you this question, and this is not a press, don't take this the wrong way. If I said to you, Edward, I want to make an app that the people that listen to this podcast can have access to the show through, like I want to make my own podcast app, and I'd like to be able to send them information through the app and break up the series into groupings for them. Would you like chuckle and be like, that's easy, Scott, I could do that on Saturday afternoon? Like, or is that a big thing?
Um, so I don't do that much I've done some Android and iOS development. There are other people on our team who have done a lot more than me and could do it in an afternoon. It would probably take me a weekend.
Wow, that's insane. What did you go to college for, and why are you smart?
I went to college for engineering, and then within engineering, I studied computer science. So I've been writing programming or doing programming since 2006.
That's crazy. I'm watching my son now. He just graduated from college. He's got a quantitative econ degree, and he's going through college, and every once in a while he'd be like, they make us use these programs we've never seen before, but they don't tell us that much about them. And now he's graduated, applying for jobs, and in his free time, just sitting in his room getting certifications and like anything he can find, because he realized a little too late that should have been his minor. He took a mathematics minor, and he's like, I should have minored in this stuff because every one of these jobs uses this.
It's amazing how many jobs these days require programming of some degree.
Yeah, no, it's really something, and he's picking it up. Actually, he said something incredibly frustrating the other day. He said, I probably didn't need to go to college. I could have just taken all these courses, and all I could think about was the money. I was like, don't say that to me. I was like, even if it's true, never, ever, ever tell me. Just, you know what I mean? Like, please just don't say it. That's something else.
It is true, especially around programming. There's just tons of things you can learn online for, little to no money. And you can find examples. There are still a lot of like foundational concepts that are a lot easier to learn at a university.
Right. I also don't know how you get in the door without some sort of a degree. To me, that sounds impossible, but I'm sure there's some barrier to entry. Although I'll tell you, my youngest brother, he's 10 years younger than I am. He was, I never talk about my brothers on the show, but my youngest brother was, we used to say, either in trouble or you were about to find out he was in trouble. Like, there was no like middle ground. You know what I mean? Like, he was either doing something he shouldn't be, or he was, and you didn't know, or the cops were there. So like, there was no middle ground for him. And coming out of high school, he just worked at a pool supply place. And I have to tell you, like, growing up, my father had a very blue collar job. I don't know that he had any more expectations than that. My mom did retail. I think that's probably what he was thinking. And he just met somebody while they were at the job, and they said, we think you could do this entry level thing in IT. And now he oversees like a huge department of people who shoot satellites into space. And so
that's pretty cool.
I don't know how that works. You know what I mean? Like, and sometimes I look at him and I'm like, he got away with it. Never went to college, never did anything. And he's making the money just like everybody else. So I don't know. It's hard to decide, but what leads you to that? Were you just always inclined, or were you super interested?
So I always enjoyed math and science. Mm-hmm. And so then I went into engineering because I figured I would use those. I didn't plan on doing computer science, but I took a couple of classes in college and found that I was pretty good at it. It was the first class was like basics of programming, and you had to write programs in, pretty complicated programming languages. These days, there's a lot of like, click and point programs that you can set up and you can do it with your kids. But this was like hardcore. In order to even like edit files, you needed to know specific commands and use these like editors that are pretty complicated. And I found that I was pretty good at it and enjoyed it. My roommate took the same class with me, and he was really struggling, and he just hated it and wanted to blow his brains out.
No kidding. Listen, I am a person who hold on a second. Does my wife not, she's got 2 jobs, and one of them stopped the dog from barking. Hold on a second. Her other job is to come up with reasons why we can't have sex. That's what's her too big. So these are her real, stuff she could put on her CV, where she could really speak thoughtfully about being adept for sure. Is she all right? Well, he stopped. Maybe she stopped. I was in a very weird situation. We'll get to your diabetes in a second. Where it's embarrassing. Hold on a second. Now she has questions about the dog, but now she doesn't. Now she needs management. All right, here we go. She tells me I can do it. I can do it. I got pulled out of my kindergarten, but this is going to pull back a curtain on me, I guess. I got pulled out of my kindergarten class. And I remember it like right now to this day. My teacher, somebody knocked on the door. My teacher came over to me and said somebody wanted to speak to me outside. I went out in the hallway, and this big man, who now I realize could have been 5'6", I have no idea, was standing over top of me. And he started talking to the teacher, and the teacher kind of bent down next to me. I remember her name. It was Mrs. Moon. And she said, "Scott, this man thinks you're smarter than the other kids, and they want to give you a test." And I was like, it's not good for a 5-year-old's ego. I was like, yeah, those other ones do seem dim to me. I get what you're saying. Like, yeah, let's get me separated, And they gave me an IQ test, which I now realize was an IQ test. I realized it because they gave it to me every year, year at the beginning of the year. And I'll tell you that I will not tell you my IQ, but I test the same exact number every time I take it. Even if I were to take one online right now, I just hit that number. I don't understand what those tests are or how they work. And it was probably the worst thing that ever happened to me, because in the 70s, they were doing something called, in my state, they called it academically talented. And I'm going to tell you, Edward, I am not academically talented at all. If you just, make the list of STEM stuff in your head and assume I'm not good at any of it. I don't know what my IQ helps me with, but it is not those things. And so I beat my head against that wall till 8th grade, like in a room with people who were clearly just smarter than I was. Everything we did, they were better at. They understood it more quickly. And when it came to the math, I was really lost, like really, really lost. They tried to put me in algebra when I was in 6th grade. And I don't know if I've ever told this story or not, but maybe a semester into that year, I pulled the teacher aside after a class and I said, "Listen, it's too late for me to drop this class. I'm stuck. You know it and I know it. I don't understand this. I'm never going to understand this. We're in trouble here, right? I'll make you a deal." And he's like, "What's this?" Imagine I'm in 6th grade.
I'll give you $20.
How old does that even make you in 6th grade? I mean, I was 5 in kindergarten, so 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I was like 11 years old. Okay, maybe 12. And I'm standing in front of him like, "Listen, here's what we're going to do." And I talked him into allowing me to sleep through his class for 3 more semesters. And I told him I was going to take a general math class in summer school to make my credit up. And he said, okay, like without even a fight. He just was like, all right. And we kept that 3/4 of the year. We kept that agreement. I came in, I
Interesting.
didn't bother him. I failed his class. He failed me, just zoom, zoom, zoom. And then I went to summer school. I do not, when you start putting numbers and letters next to each other and telling me they equal something, I can feel my brain short circuiting. I cannot follow it, like, to save my life. And the reason I tell you that,
I don't know, I'm always impressed by your math skills on the podcast.
sure. Sure. No,
I don't know if you have a calculator ready when you do it, but
I can do simple addition
usually
and
pretty
subtraction. But my point is that when I listen to my son talk about math, I think our mailman must be really good at math because I can't imagine he's my kid the way he understands numbers. It's really bizarre. Like, I don't know. It just happens for some people. And for others, like me, by the way, it did not happen for. So,
well, on the flip side, I really struggled with other things like, reading and history and other classes like that. So, yeah.
Oh, Edward,
nobody gets everything.
You're being delightful. I didn't do any of my. I can't believe I have a high school diploma. I forget what year it was in middle school. We had this great English teacher, and he's like, "We're going to read Romeo and Juliet, and we're going to read it together." And I was just like, "Oh, I'm not reading that." and we had my senior year of high school, on my first day of my senior year of high school, the English teacher said, "We're going to do a research paper, but don't worry, you have the whole year to do it." And he explained what it was and this whole thing. And I swear to you, I raised my hand, and he's like, "Yes, you have a question about the research paper?" I said, "I do." I said, "What happens if I don't do it? Can I still graduate?" And he goes, "No." And I was like, "Yeah, I got a job. I don't think I could do this." And I was just like, it sounded impossible to me what he was saying. And I'm sure if I was back in that room right now, he's probably saying, make yourself acquainted with something and write a 4-page paper on it. It wasn't a big deal what he was asking. And to my convictions, I kept good grades in that class that whole year. And I thought, like, he can't fail me for not handing in one paper. And I didn't hand in a paper, and he didn't fail me. So anyway, his bluff did not work on me. I don't know. So I think that's where my intellect works. It works in, like, it's why if you hear me say, like, if the zombies come, find me, I'll be okay. But we're not going to do any algebra. Anyway.
So I think it's interesting, though. I think a lot of times people assume that they can't do things, but I think if they find the right ways to learn it, that you'd be surprised how people can do it. So I always thought that I was terrible at music. When I was growing up, I tried playing the piano, the guitar. It was just a disaster. It sounded horrible.
Right.
But a few years ago, my wife found a piano for free on Facebook, and we went to go pick it up with a U-Haul. And I was like, why on earth are we getting a piano? This is going to be just a waste of space. But I tuned it, and I learned a couple of songs on the piano, and I was really surprised how finding different ways to learn it. I mean, it was watching YouTube videos, but how I was able to actually learn something that I had always assumed that I was just terrible at, and it just wasn't going to work for me.
No, it's a great point. And the truth is that I think one of the things that got in my way of expanding when I was younger is that I was adopted. So that nothing about the way I saw the world did anyone else see it in my house. And those people were in charge of giving me things to do. So they would direct me towards, I mean, the only really way I can say it is like more blue collar endeavors. Like I went to school because I don't want to paint them as like preppers or something like that. They're not, but I went to school because the state makes you send your kids to school. Right. So that's why they sent me to school. They sent me to school so they wouldn't get in trouble. And it was a great place to park me while they were working. It was
free childcare.
No one once said to me, when you're done high school, you would go to college. Like, I didn't take the SAT. I remember being at school the day I realized my friends were signing up to take the SAT, and I didn't know what they were doing. Like, I had to ask a friend. I was like, why is everyone doing this? Is this something I have to do? And and they're like, no, you take this and they give you a score and then you send the score. Like that was being explained to me like I was from another planet, you know? And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I was like, I can't go to college. Like no one's ever mentioned college to me before. And then I did look into it a little bit. And even at like a local community college level, I couldn't afford to do that. And I don't mean like I couldn't afford college. I mean, I couldn't, but I couldn't afford a car to get me to the college. Like there was nothing about my life that was going to send me to school. And no one ever once, you know, rigged the board for me to get to the end. And so I just,
Right.
I went to my high school graduation. We came home. My mom gave me an ice cream cake to celebrate. I remember that. And then I went to bed, got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and started working full time in my uncle's sheet metal shop. And that was it. It's just what I thought I was going to do. Like my friends all went on vacation and they were like, I was like, I got to go to work. And I graduated from high school and I went to work. So, I think you're right. I think if someone would have pointed me in a different direction and given me a couple of pointers, I might have been in a different situation. But as it stands, you don't want to ask me about anything particularly technical, except for some reason, diabetes. that I seem to understand. Okay. All right. So do you work with your kids with it? Do you do the little like WYSIWYG like stuff? Do you think they'll be interested, or do you think you'll be like me one day where you're like, these kids have none of my interests at all?
They actually already have it in kindergarten. They've got some like code-ish like games and things like that for kindergartners, which is really amazing.
Okay.
I think really just getting them to enjoy math and science and other things, but also exposing them to everything as much as we can is what we really like to do. My son, we're actually super proud. He just had a birthday party and we were making up pin the tail on the donkey games. And so it's like, you know, pin the arm on the robot or things like that. And he wanted to do pin the science on the stem.
Look at that.
And
yeah, let's get that kid a good job one day. I like that. I think I was actually inclined to it because if you've ever heard me talk about it, I bought the first Radio Shack computer. Like I had it and it was all about programming and I had programming books. I couldn't figure, the first thing I tried didn't work and I gave it up. And I realized now the reason I gave up so quickly, it was financial. Like it took me so long to save up the money to buy this computer that when it didn't do what I thought it was going to do, which really just meant that I did something wrong, I took it back right away because I couldn't afford to own something that didn't do something for me. So it's interesting how that stuff impacts you. Anyway, sorry, it was a long way to go. I was just very interested. So you're 18 in 2006. You're on your way to some sort of a dork Olympics, it sounds like to me. And you get diabetes. Is there anything that would have made you think prior to that day that type 1 was a possibility for you?
I knew nothing about type 1.
Okay.
Couldn't even tell you what it was.
Nobody in the family, nothing. Yeah.
Nobody in the family. My grandmother had some thyroid problems, but nothing.
Yeah, nothing that you would link to yourself. You wouldn't look at your grandmother and be like, "Grandma's hair falls out a lot. I'll probably get diabetes one day." Yeah.
Right. So I started losing weight. I played a lot of sports growing up in high school. Played soccer, lacrosse, hockey, skiing, snowboarding, tennis, all sorts of things. But I wasn't playing sports at the time. And I started losing weight. And my parents were concerned. And they actually told me that I needed to put on weight and forced me kind of to start drinking milk, which is like the worst thing that could have happened. I'm sure my blood sugar just went straight through the roof.
Yeah, I imagine.
For hours on end. And one day I went on the treadmill and afterwards I felt amazing. I was like, oh, I'm going to take up more running. And they're like, no, you can't run. because you're losing too much weight.
Keep drinking the liquefied fat. It'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. This is helping you. I mean, they're absolutely wonderful, but it was just kind of ironic how it worked out. And then finally they're like, okay, we got to go see a doctor. And so I went into school to take a test. And then afterwards they took me to the doctor, and there they tested my blood sugar, and it just read as high. So it must have been, over 400 or something crazy high to be off the meter. So then we drove to Yale Pediatrics for diabetes. Mm-hmm. And on the way there, I fell asleep or passed out in the car. And the next thing I knew, I was in the hospital and they're trying to get me into this bed. And I woke up and was like trying to push people away. And then I guess I fell asleep again.
No kidding.
And sort of woke up at some point later.
DKA, or did they ever say?
Maybe.
I mean,
a part of me wants to call them up and see if they have my records from ages ago, but I don't know if they would.
Because I'm looking at you today and I can only see you from the shoulders up, but there's something about your frame that makes me think you're tall. Is that fair? Not particularly?
No, just 5'10".
Oh, well, all right. Listen, still, I'm trying to imagine them getting an 18-year-old you from the car into the hospital without you noticing. Like, you had to have been out of it.
Yeah, my mom said that she tried to wake me up and I wouldn't wake up in the car. The doctor had said you could call the ambulance, but by the time the ambulance gets here to then take you to the hospital, it'll just be faster to just drive me straight there. So I went there, and so I was diagnosed. I started on MDI, so it's 2 shots a day with, I don't remember what the insulin was called, but it's the one that's cloudy and you had to like roll it before taking that, and then Novolog. And so I do a shot in the morning and a shot in the evening. And every day I would call in to the doctor's office and give them my numbers for the day. And they would tell me what shots to do and how much to eat for like the next day.
How long did that go on for?
So that went on for 6 months to a year. And then I got on a Medtronic pump.
Wow. Wait, for a year, every day you called a number like you were...
I think that after a few months, I had to call in like once a week or something.
Frequently. Okay. Still, that's amazing. Even if it was just a few
But months. I remember this was in like the time of like beepers and stuff where you'd call in a number to send a text message to a beeper and things like that. So
yeah, it must have felt like you were a spy. Yes. like just a disembodied voice on the other end. You're like 118. She gives you coordinates back, and you're like, yes, okay. And wow, that's fascinating.
That would have been a much cooler way to think about it.
Yeah, you probably should have had a little of my brain. It would have helped you not be sad, which I'm assuming you were. And you're also, I mean, this is going to college age too, right? So this happened to you. It sounds like in high school, because you still went to a pediatric.
Yeah, it was actually right before spring break, and I still went on spring break to where'd I go? I don't know, somewhere in Mexico or something for spring break, which was a lot of fun.
But you went to a pump.
Probably not the best idea.
But did it? See, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I interviewed a woman yesterday, 72 years old. She's had diabetes for 50 years. She doesn't have one thing wrong with her. It's just fascinating. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's interesting how, I mean, she describes her care in the past, and you think, like, how did she not die 40 years ago? You know what I mean? Like, and it was in a time when the expectation was, I've done a few older people's interviews this week, and a gentleman who was older as well told me, as soon as I was diagnosed, he's like, it was a shortened lifespan. It was, you're not going to live as long.
Yeah.
Don't even worry about it. Like he said, his care was even centered around the idea that, we're just trying to keep you going for as long as we can. And if you were getting cloudy, then, I mean, that was still that was that kind of care. Did you ever have that feeling? Did anyone ever say something like that to you?
So the doctors, I remember them putting a really positive spin on it.
Hmm.
Being like, there are these basketball players who have diabetes, or like these other famous people. There are lots of people who have diabetes. It's going to be totally fine. And I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, I have diabetes, whatever. I'm just going to live my life with it,
Right.
and things will be fine. Little did I know,
What all it
that it's
entailed.
going to be, yeah.
I think they were probably telling you about Chris Dudley if it was 2006. He's been on the show.
Maybe, I don't know.
No, I mean, he's the
Okay.
only one I can think of. So you're a little naive, right? You went off on your trip and then you headed off to school, but they gave you a pump your freshman year in college?
Yeah. So I started on I forget what the maker was, but it was before Medtronic. So I started on a pump, and then a few years later, I switched to a Medtronic pump, and was on those for a while.
So did you go to Humalog at that point? Do you remember?
I think it was Novolog.
Novolog. So Novolog in a pump, and that changes your so you went from like calling people to doing everything yourself.
Yes. I didn't do it well, but I did it myself.
That's what I'm trying to get to. So what were your outcomes like in college?
I don't know. They weren't really great. I remember having lots of lows, and but when I had lows, I was kind of funny. These days when I get low, I'm just still like normal and can think, but I would like say ridiculous things, or do funny things. I'd get really stubborn sometimes. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she would tell me all these like stories where she would be like, you have low blood sugar, you need to have something to eat. And I'd be like, no. And I would get argumentative. And she'd be like, you know what, if you don't have something to eat, I'm going to call your mom. And then I put my hands over my mouth.
Like sort of like Home Alone, like, oh my God, like that. Like,
no, like you can't force me. I'm just going to cover my mouth so that you can't put anything in.
Like you're 4 years old, Edward.
And then, and then another time I had low blood sugar, but I thought it had to be high blood sugar. And I didn't have my meter with me. And she was like, I'm just going to eat these cookies and put one here next to you. And of course, I snatched it up and ate it.
I just had a moment with Arden the other night where I was like, you have to do something about your low blood sugar. And she's like, I will. And I said, Arden, now, like, if you do it now, you're not actually going to get low. Like, I can see it coming. Like, this is going to be, like, this is a 50 if you don't do something. And she's like, I will. I'm not hungry. I don't want to. Have a juice. No. Do this. No. Get out of my room. I'll take care of it. I'm like, okay. So, I mean, I walked out of her room and sat like up the hall waiting because her blood sugar was, then I saw it go the other way and I was like, oh, okay, she got it. But I know that thing, like you lose your cognitive ability. You just, and you think you're making a ton of sense too, which is really interesting. And your friends loved it, right? It's because you turned into a goofball.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, you're lucky they didn't figure out how to give you insulin just to make you low, just to pass the time in college. Someone give Edward a unit so he says something stupid. Jesus. And your girlfriend, who becomes your wife afterwards, she saw all that in college and married you? Wow.
She did. And my mom was even like, he's got diabetes. It's going to be a lot of work. Are you sure you want to marry him? And
thanks, Mom. Your mom thinks it's easy to get girls.
To be fair, it was a totally fair thing to say.
Well, yeah, but someone got to be on your team. I had to pull her aside and I've been like, listen, I have no other prospects. This is not something. This isn't okay. That's interesting.
She comes from a family of allergies, and so she had allergies to milk and eggs growing up. Like if milk touched her skin, she'd start throwing up. And her sister has like a peanut allergy, and our kids have allergies. Some of them they've outgrown some of them. But between like diabetes and allergies, our kids potentially hit like the genetics jackpot.
Yeah, well, I think of
But
it's funny. I don't know how science thinks of it, and I'm sure we could Google it and find out. But I think of allergies as autoimmune. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's your body
right.
having a ramped up response to something. So yeah, that's something else. Jeez, yeah. Forget college. You better start saving for medical insurance and stuff like that. Wait a minute. Like, if I flick milk at your wife and it hits her, she vomits?
Not anymore. Not anymore.
Oh,
but when she was very young, she did.
Hell of a party trick.
Yeah. So there's one time when they wanted, what was it? They had to go somewhere and they had to like change their flights or something. Mm-hmm. And they're like, sorry, you can't change your flights unless you've got a doctor and get like a refund unless you've got a doctor's note. And they're like, And they gave her a little bit of milk and took her to the doctor so that they could get their flights changed and get a refund.
Okay, hold on. So her family made her vomit to get a doctor's note to get a refund on an airline ticket?
Yeah.
I like those people.
So it's not for her, it's not
not
too dangerous of a reaction. She would just throw up and take Benadryl and then she'd be fine. It's not like a peanut allergy where you have like respiratory issues and can't breathe.
Did they explain this to her? Was she a co-conspirator in this thing?
Maybe.
I don't know what to think. I don't know if I like the story better if they just are like, drink this, stand in front of the doctor, or if they pulled her aside like a little thug and they were like, here's what we're gonna do.
The best part was that it was in Canada, so seeing the doctor is free too, so they didn't have to pay for that either.
Oh my goodness. Are you Canadian?
She is Canadian.
She is Canadian.
And her father is Canadian.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's something. Where do you live? You don't live?
No. We live in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. Well,
outside of Philadelphia.
Oh, we're very close to each other.
We are.
Oh.
When I signed up for this, I was like, I wonder if I should just go to Scott's house and you'd have a nice microphone and we could record in person.
I do have one right here. We could have done that. I've only ever sat in a room with Arden and made a podcast. It's the only person I've ever been right in front of. Oh, when we're done, we're going to have to find out where you are because it's possible. Okay. You know, we're up the street from each other almost. Okay. So you've got diabetes. They start you on a pump. Not particularly well, a lot of lows. Are you going to the doctor with any regularity through college, getting A1Cs or anything like that?
No, the pediatric diabetic office where I was going, they stopped writing me prescriptions in like sophomore year or something. They're like, you haven't been here in 2 years. We can't keep writing you prescriptions. Mm-hmm. So then I went to see a doctor once or twice. So not very often. Right.
So you just went back to another doctor to get a different prescription. When do you, I was going to say, when did you start seeing a doctor regularly, but maybe you don't.
So it was after college. I did. And for me, the promise was always in technology. Mm-hmm. I started on the Medtronic 670G, or maybe it was 630G, the first one that had the automated mode.
Okay.
And so I went back. I actually looked it up. My A1Cs were in like the 7s, and then with the 630G, it brought my A1Cs down to 6.1, 6.2.
That's great.
So that was really amazing for me. I found special ways to make it work, and I even found that in the settings, if you changed the insulin activity you could turn it down all the way to like 2 hours or something like that, which is obviously not how long insulin is in your body for. But by doing that, it made the algorithm more aggressive.
Yeah.
Because it would see that you have almost no insulin left on board, and therefore it's going to give you more to bring your blood sugar down faster.
So did that pump have a glucose monitor attached to it at that point? It did, right?
Yeah, so that was the one with the integrated glucose. There's one before that had a glucose monitor, but it wasn't very good. And it had this like harpoon to get it into you, and it was super uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And it was like probably half an hour to 45 minutes delayed in what your blood sugar actually was. And so I didn't really find it helpful at all.
Right.
The endocrinologist wanted me to wear it. So I'd wear it for like a week before going to see them, which in hindsight now I see how it could show you the trends and things like that, to help you better adjust your basal.
But were you focused
and
then,
settings? But
you were focused then on that it was the data was so late from when it was measured that you're just like, well, how is this valuable to me? But you could have macroed it and seen your
right,
graphs.
exactly.
Yeah. I understand. They didn't even. I don't even think back then the doctors probably knew enough about it to even give you that insight to how. And this is when. What's the year for that? Do you know? About.
So I started on the the one with auto mode in 2016.
Okay.
So the previous version would have been 2012 to 2016.
Gotcha. All right. It's so I have this problem all the time. I look at 2006 written in front of me when you're diagnosed, and it feels like it was. I don't think of it as long ago. I don't know. It's just my age. Like anything with a 2 in front of it, I was like, yeah, that just happened. And, and then you start telling the story, and I keep thinking it's 2022. It's just. I mean, I don't know. There's something about those numbers, they mess with me. So you're doing this, but what you really like about it, and 39 minutes into this, Edward, is why you're on this show. I'm either great at this or really bad at it. I don't know. I can't even tell the difference anymore. But the technology part you said really attracted you to it. So when did you built your own algorithm, right?
Correct.
Back before.
So
yeah, tell me about it.
So I was on the 630G, and actually before being on the 630G, on the prior one with like the Harpoon CGM that wasn't very accurate, I found online somebody who had managed to kind of hack into the pump and extract the data. And so I worked with him and was actually able to decode the data for the CGM and load the CGM data onto a computer. And so I initially tried to create my own closed loop system using that. And I did it like on a laptop computer. And then I was going to put it onto like a small Raspberry Pi computer that could fit in my pocket. But between like that computer and a battery for that computer and the pump and the transmitter to communicate with the pump, I would have to carry like a fanny pack around.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do this.
Even good health.
I'll just wait for Medtronic to release the 630G and use that.
Right.
But after using it, I kind of got frustrated with it because it being the first one, it was very conservative. And it would bring your blood sugar down to like 150 and then slowly bring it down to like 120, but it wouldn't go. It would try to keep you above 120 all the time. And I wanted to start getting better control.
Okay.
And so when I was done with that, I was looking around to see what to switch to next. And that was when I came across the Loop community and the Android APS app and started using that. And since then, so when I started using that, my A1C dropped from.
I'm going to tell you about one of the better decisions I made last year. I switched Arden's delivery of her diabetes supplies from where we were getting them to US Med. And US Med is more than edging out the service that we were getting from that previous company. Right from the comfort of your home or office, you can join over 1 million satisfied customers who rely on US Med for courteous, knowledgeable, and trained customer care. And their representatives are going to keep you up to date with your medical and diabetic supplies, all delivered right to your door. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514 to get your free benefits check right now. US Med features a litany of things that you're going to love. How about an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau? They accept Medicare nationwide and over 800 private insurers. They carry everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest CGMs like the Freestyle Libre 3, the Dexcom G6, and a little bird told me the Dexcom G7 coming very soon. They always provide you with 90 days worth of supplies and fast and free shipping. Better service and better care is what you're going to get when you go to usmed.com/juicebox. On top of all of this, US Med is now dispensing Novolog Insulin Aspart and Humalog Insulin Lispro through their pharmacy benefits. What are you waiting for? usmed.com/juicebox, 888-721-1514. US Med is the #1 distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide. They are the #1 specialty distributor for Omnipod DASH. They are the place we got Arden's Omnipod 5s from. US Med provides Arden with her Dexcom supplies. And they're the #1 fastest growing Tandem distributor nationwide. I mean, I guess I could say it again, but are you just already online getting it done? Are you even listening to me anymore? Or have you already called 888-721-1514? Don't like the phone? usmed.com/juicebox. The other day I got an email from US Med and it said, you want some more supplies? I guess it was time. And I said, yes. I clicked the button and then they just showed up. You want to do it like that? It's pretty damn easy. usmed.com/juicebox.
.1 to 5.6,
right,
which was really amazing for me. But the best part was really the alerts and alarms. So for me, I'm a very heavy sleeper, and I would, like, the alarms would be going off on my pump and it would be beeping away and I would be sleeping through it. And my wife would kick me because it was disturbing her. And I would wake up in like a half asleep, and I would just sort of dismiss the alarm and go back to sleep. And 20 minutes later, she'd kick me again, and I'd wake up and dismiss it and go back to sleep. And sometimes, and then eventually I would get up and, have some sugar or things like that. But in my like half asleep state, I would sometimes do the wrong thing. So there are even times when I would give myself insulin when I was low, and my wife would look at me and she'd be like, "What on earth are you doing? You just gave yourself insulin and you have low blood sugar." And like, after like a few minutes of talking to me, I would then be like really cognizant and
having a meal at
realize
3:30.
that I would need to realize that I would need to go and chug a bunch of orange juice because I had just given myself 3 units of insulin when I already had low blood sugar.
There's a story floating around the internet right now of a gentleman that just did that and killed himself. So it's such a crazy tightrope act, It's
so with like Android APS, I love it because I've set up alerts where it'll send off an alarm, and the alarm will go off every 5 minutes if my blood sugar is dropping below 75, or if it's dropping below 80 and dropping quickly at night. And so the first one I usually just dismiss and go back to sleep, but by the third or fourth alarm I've woken up and had something to eat, and then that saves me a lot from having nighttime lows. I have fewer nighttime lows, but they still happen occasionally.
You keep stuff by your bedside?
Yeah.
Looks like a little convenience store, but a Wawa, I guess. Finally, I can say Wawa.
Yeah, and then sometimes I'll come down to the kitchen in the morning and I'll have just like eaten everything. There'll be like candy wrappers and gummy wrappers all over the place, and my blood sugar will still be coming down from like 200. I'll be like, oh God, that was horrible.
I overdid it. What's that feel like in the morning after you've been through that? Is it I know people say like lows overnight make them feel hungover. What do highs overnight make you feel like?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar. You feel like dehydrated and hungover. And then having young kids, there's usually one of the kids is up at night at least once during the night. So then you just feel even more tired.
Right. Do you ever feel achy? Is that ever a thing that happens after highs? Just body aches or?
So I've started to notice that sometimes my like tendons and stuff hurt a little bit, or they're not hurt, but they're just like more sensitive. And I can feel that like in my hands or in my ankles, they're like tighter and stuff, especially when I have high blood sugar or
Mhm.
extended high blood sugars.
It's interesting because Arden's ribs get sore sometimes. And, I guess cartilage and connective tissue and stuff like that. It's interesting. Oh, wow. Okay, so you built is it Dana Lewis who I had on the show years ago about Android APS? Like, is that a name you recognize?
Yes, she's one of the contributors. And there are a bunch of other contributors to Android APS as well.
Yeah.
A lot of them are abroad.
Okay. What made you go Android? It was available prior to Loop, right? Android was first. Android APS was before Loop. Am I right?
I don't know which one was
I
first.
don't either.
Um,
You're just an Android person?
but yeah, just an Android person.
Yeah.
So I went with that. And so then for that, it's really interesting. It's got this really cool feature where when you start using it, it doesn't unlock all of the features until you've gone through certain milestones.
Mhm.
So it starts you out in manual mode, and you have to do that for like a couple of weeks, and you need to answer some like kind of test questions to make sure that you understand how it's working. And then it will do a mode where it will prompt you whenever it wants to change your basal rate, and you do that for a few weeks and learn how that works, and then it starts to do that automatically. And then a few weeks after that, you can learn how to use the what they call small micro boluses,
Mhm.
which is basically where it'll give you boluses rather than adjusting your basal rate.
I think by the way, I think that's brilliant. If you listen to the show, you've heard that I've advocated it to companies all the time, and no one seems
Yeah.
to no one seems to listen to me. But for all different kinds of applications, I keep saying to them, like, why not have a beginner, an intermediate, and an expert level that you can unlock by. I mean, that's a great way. Even having your
Yeah.
doctor sign off on you sliding up some things. Like, imagine if you could. Right now, what Omnipod 5's target is 110. To Control IQ's target's 112 and a half. Like, what if you could unlock a lower target or something like that?
Yeah.
That,
And you can even do even more stuff, like if you have lows or if you have an extreme low, then it's going to kick you out of that lower target for 24 hours to make sure that you don't get another extreme low,
right,
or things like that.
Yeah,
Some of it is like, the first couple of hours of wearing the Dexcom. Sometimes it can trend lower than it really is. Like it says it's 46, but you test your blood sugar and you're 86.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually it sort of catches up, which some of that could be frustrating. But I think there's so many things that you can do. And there's tons of stuff like that built into Android APS, which I really love.
I never know how to answer people's questions because inevitably someone says, on these automated systems, what if my CGM's way off? What do I do? And I don't know how to say, like, I don't know. It's not usually an issue. and when it is, like, you just, like, Arden switched her CGM day and a half ago. And for the first 24 hours, it was reading lower than she was, but her blood sugars were higher. So she had like an right. impact from hormones. So she was in this more like 170 range. And then I don't know how to put this other than she was too steady, too high for too long. And it made me think, why is her blood sugar not coming down with the amount of insulin we gave her? Oh, her blood sugar must actually be higher than this says. And there's something about that collection of circumstances that make me go, test your blood sugar, you're higher than this says you are. And then as soon as I prove that that's correct, then you can make a large enough bolus to actually impact it, and then boom, you're okay. But yeah, I don't know how you explain that to somebody on day one,
Yeah. Like usually when I first start, the sensors, I'll just stay in manual mode and just let my regular basal rate run until I know that the sensor is actually working effectively. Sometimes I put it on, it works effectively immediately. Sometimes I'll do the pre-soaking where you put it on and you stick in like an old dead transmitter and then swap the transmitter in. So then it's been in underneath your skin for 12 or 24 hours before it's actually being used.
Yeah, you get more accuracy from it right away. What
Right.
what pumps does Android APS support?
So Android APS supports a bunch of pumps, some like European pumps, and I think even like some from South Korea, as well as Medtronic and Omnipod, the original Omnipod, as well as Omnipod DASH. And I'm using Omnipod DASH, which is really fantastic because there's nothing to carry around other than your phone, which,
Yeah.
like most people these days, I'm glued to my phone anyway.
Right.
So it's really nice to not have anything to carry around.
It's my expectation that that's the system we're going to put Arden on. As soon as Loop is ready, there's a Loop. I think Loop's betaing Omnipod DASH right now, and I think it's very close to being done. So
yeah.
I'm just waiting.
It's really great.
Yeah.
So then after doing that, for a while, I did some contributions to it. So I tested that. I was one of the early testers for the Dash capability. And then I was one of the early testers for this new algorithm that people have been working on in the Android APS community that's called Dynamic ISF, where it looks at your total daily dose from the last 7 days, the last day, the last like 4 hours, and the last 4 hours before that, in order to estimate what your insulin sensitivity should be, which is pretty cool. And there's actually some really cool science behind it, which is why a lot of the pump manufacturers use it, where if you've given yourself more insulin over the last few days or whatever, you have chemically within your cells like more resistance built up. I don't know exactly how the chemistry works, but it's kind of like people say when you drink more, you're
you don't get drunk as fast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. I thought that's
so kind of similar concept with insulin,
right?
Which is pretty cool. So I tested out that, and over the last 4 to 6 months, I've actually taken my experiences from work of working on artificial intelligence and machine learning, and built my own algorithm that uses AI and ML to build a model, and it uses a whole bunch of data. So it uses those total daily dose insulin factors. It uses the time of day. It uses activity tracked from my watch, so I wear a smartwatch that tracks the number of steps that I take, and from the phone. And I'm actually working on incorporating heart rate monitoring. So from the watch, it monitors my heart rate and sends that to my phone, so I can include that in the algorithm as well. What else does it use?
Well, let's stop there for a second. So having just a step tracker on, then that allows a sort of like not unknowable variable, but something that it's hard to remember when you're making manual decisions about your insulin, it's hard to think, oh, I walked around more today than I did yesterday. I'll cut this back, or maybe my insulin sensitivity should be a little weaker or something like that. But you're saying that the algorithm would be able to take that into account.
So it does. Yeah. So basically what you do is you feed it, instead of writing out for machine learning, instead of writing out an algorithm, you give it a bunch of data and you give it the answers. So you say, my blood sugar went up half an hour later. I should have done more insulin half an hour earlier. And you give it all the factors, and then it will figure out what the algorithm should be specifically for you. So it's really amazing. And it's just a total change in perception and way of thinking about it.
Well, I definitely see the retail space is moving that way, because Omnipod 5 is they won't even tell you what it's doing. So, it's like it's learning, and I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And if you ask them directly, there's no hiding it. They'll say this is proprietary information, and so my expectation is, I've always thought that. Like, I was like, well, if they're working on it, like the DIY community's got to be doing it as well. I just don't have a real in with Android APS to hear the conversations. But that's fascinating.
So this is something that I've been working on independently. I've worked with a couple of other people, but it's still kind of early. And then my thought was to then find other people who are interested in experimenting with it and help roll it out to more people, and then eventually make it easy and accessible for everybody in the Android APS space. There is actually a French company called Diaboloop. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but they actually use AI and ML for their algorithm in Europe, which is pretty cool.
It's exciting, actually, is what it is.
Yeah,
because
it's,
I guess, and so are you using it right now for yourself? You are. Where is it holding your blood sugar?
So right now my blood sugar is 129. The target is 90, and it can keep it pretty stable there. But so it's pretty cool. So it uses, what else does it use? It uses the insulin on board, the amount of carbs that I've eaten. I've recently been working on adding in the type of carbohydrates. So recording, have I eaten pizza or salad or, orange juice, and then being able to incorporate that into the algorithm, because the algorithm should be able to learn that, hey, you ate pizza 4 hours ago. I'm going to need to increase your insulin in order to account for the fat rise that's going to come later on, and things like that. And even like specific types of pizza. Have you eaten pizza from Domino's or have you eaten homemade pizza? And being able to factor those things in, because it can basically see, in the past 9 out of 10 times when you've had Domino's pizza, you've had a rise 4 hours later. But when you've had homemade pizza, 9 out of 10 times, you've had a rise 2 hours later, because there's less oil and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it might be less significant as well, because I mean, we do it here, and that's exactly what we see too. The crust is thinner. I'm not dousing it in oil. There's not a ton of salt on it. Like, it's it's not covered in cheese. There's cheese here and there. That's but that's exciting, isn't it? Well, we got to keep you healthy, Edward. We got to keep you moving, and your wife needs to be nice. No more kicking you at night. You need to be treated better. Is the idea to, like, do you really think you can get it to a place where you'd be comfortable sharing it with other people like that?
Yeah, definitely. So I take all the data, and then I train and build a model on my computer, and then I load that model onto the phone and then use that model. I built in a bunch of safety requirements as well. Like, if my blood sugar is dropping, it's going to be restricted in how much it can give me. You can put in restrictions around how much insulin it can give for each microbolus. There's thresholds around how much it can give in total, like how much insulin you can have on board at any time. So there's a bunch of like safety around it, but all of those safety requirements are built around what I need for safety, not necessarily around
what anybody would need.
What any person with diabetes needs for safety. I'm pretty relatively easy. I'm not a young child.
Right.
I don't go to school. I work from home. I carry glucose tablets with me, just in my pocket. I've got a little thing, and I carry 2 glucose tablets with me all the time.
Do you imagine?
So safety isn't really too bad for me, but it shouldn't be that hard to make it safe for other people as well.
That's what I was wondering. Is like, can you imagine a world where the thing you're working on could be that? How do I want to put this? Where it can do the job that it's doing for you, but be generic enough that it could just be a retail item.
Yeah. So I think that this is going to be the way that it will be for pump manufacturers. I think that they'll probably have another couple of iterations of doing it manually, like writing the algorithms manually.
Mm-hmm.
But then eventually, over the next maybe 5 or 10 years out, it will be using machine learning. And actually, I've stalked Omnipod and Dexcom online, and they actually hire a lot of like data scientists and machine learning people. So they're using a lot of this, but then they're translating sort of what they're learning and what they're seeing in the data into still handwritten algorithms that then use inputs. Like I know that Omnipod uses like total daily dose of insulin in their algorithm, and they probably use I know they use total daily dose from the last 3 days. They probably use it from the last day and the last few hours or things like that,
right,
to figure out how much insulin to give you. But they don't factor in things like, exercise, hormones, stress, food, types of food, things like that, which you can really get. And a machine learning algorithm can do and use.
Mm-hmm.
For figuring out how much insulin to give people.
Edward, do this for me. Tell me something that exists in the world today that people would be aware of that is employing machine learning.
Tesla cars. That's one of the simplest ones. So Tesla's got their autopilot and self-driving car features. Mm-hmm. So that's all around machine learning. So they take in basically tons and tons of video data. And then the answer is, you've got to stay in the road. And times when the car drove outside the road from the AI and machine learning system, but the person steered it back into the road. Those are areas where you need to adjust the machine learning algorithm and provide it more data and say, you should have turned right when you tried to turn left to stay in the road. And therefore learn from this experience and build that back into the model.
So in that example, and I don't know why I know this, but I know that Tesla had to actually build their own computers to do that process because they couldn't buy powerful enough computers to do it, right?
Yeah.
And they're getting data from every car that checks off, you can have my car's data. And
right.
And so these computers are just running these simulations over and over. And then from what it sees, the computer says, all right, well, line whatever in the code should be this instead of this because, or what I know I'm oversimplifying it greatly, but it's learning and making adjustments to the software that's on board in the cars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So another way to think about it is, so when you write a traditional program, you say, if your blood sugar is high, if your blood sugar is X, then you need to bring it down 50 points, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for 50 points, if your total daily dose was 100, then your insulin sensitivity is going to be 50. So you need 1 unit to bring you down 50 points. We're going to give you 1 unit, right? So you basically write all that out to say, if this, then that. And if something else, then do something else. And you write out that logic by hand.
Okay.
But the machine learning basically figures out what that logic should be. So you can actually have it generate out this machine learning algorithm approach called random forests, where it will write out those sort of if-then statements for you. And it builds kind of like a little tree that you could imagine that at the base, you say, is your blood sugar high or low? Okay. If it's high, then do this or that. And if it's low, then do X or Y. And it'll build out hundreds of these trees. And then each tree will make a prediction of what it thinks it should do. And then it'll take an average to figure out how much insulin to give you.
Okay. So it could, in that scenario, it could say, listen, normally we want to move 50 points and that's a unit, but I see that you've walked more today than normal, so we're going to use 0.8 instead, something like that. Or,
right.
Or over the last 24 hours, we've been using 30% more insulin than we expect to, so I'm going to give you a 1.3 in this situation.
Yeah.
Wow.
So then,
that's one
way to do
Edward. You understand? That's it. That puts me out of business. That's for sure.
So I've been using an algorithm it's called neural networks. And so it's kind of similar, but think of it more around probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you're high, you probably need 1 unit 9 out of 10 times, but you've exercised. So when you've exercised 9 out of 10 times, you need half of the amount of insulin. But I can also see that you've eaten 60 grams of carbs. So when you've eaten 60 grams of carbs, you usually need, a little bit more. And so then it adds all those pieces up to then figure out how much insulin to give you.
Right. It looks at the carbs, then it looks at the activity, and here's your number. And this happens,
right, exactly.
And this happens in a blink of an eye. Like, you don't notice it happening.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, so it makes predictions every 5 minutes when it gets the reading from the Dexcom. And then it takes in all those factors and then calculates what it should give you. So right now, let's see. For example, it says, so this is my current blood sugar is 136 and it's going up +3. And so it says the AI model predicted a small micro bolus of 0.207 units. And then it goes in and factors in a bunch of safety requirements. And then it rounds it to 0.05. So it's going to give me 0.2 units of insulin.
Okay. And
so it did that.
That just happens automatically. It's not done through basal. It's done in an auto bolus.
Yeah. Right. So then everything's done through an auto bolus.
Yeah.
And so then it sends the communication to the pump and then gives me the amount of insulin that it should do.
Yeah. I'll tell you, for Arden, Loop made a big leap for her when we left the version that was just using basal to try to stop, and it moved to the auto bolus version. That was a big deal for her. There are still sometimes, very infrequently, but it can happen where if she has a low and she puts in some carbs to fix it, but uses too many carbs and then hits her threshold again, it boluses and you're like, no, please don't bolus here. You know what I mean? And then she's low again 30 minutes later. And then I've showed it to her. I'm like, you can't over treat it, because you're also not telling it you took in the carbs. And that's a weird.
So there's some cool things that you can do. I used to run into that a lot. And so with Android APS, you can set up automations. And so one of them that I had set up was anytime that I went low, I would set a temporary target of 130 for the following hour in order to avoid having a second low by overcorrecting, because you eat fast acting carbs and it thinks your blood sugar is going to shoot up to 200, but then the carbs are gone and then there's too much insulin on, and then it crashes down again and you get sort of a yo-yoing effect.
So you just did a temporary target that was higher.
Right. Yeah. To say, let's avoid doing a second low, which then I'm going to treat and overtreat. Let's just keep it steady for a little bit and then bring it down slower.
The woman I spoke to yesterday, who I told you was 72, she's looping, which I'm like, I thought was terrific. And she said when she goes and does things like meets new people, she gets a little adrenaline. And she's like, I don't like to bolus for it. Instead, I set my target lower. So then the algorithm's a little more aggressive, not a ton aggressive, and then the bump she gets wasn't as isn't as significant, and she doesn't end up low later. It's really
The other thing that Android APS can do, which is really cool, is that it can see based on how many carbs you put in and how much it thinks it's seen of those carbs. It can say, you're likely to go low in the next 45 minutes and you should eat, 15 carbs or 10 carbs or 8 carbs, which then really helps with overcorrecting. And it can see it far enough out that you can have it to then totally avoid the low.
Wow. That's pretty good.
Which is really nice.
It pops up and tells you, like, you should have 8 carbs now. Wow.
Right, exactly. And then the other thing that I really like is, so I use another app called XStrip, which works with Android APS, but it allows you a lot finer control over the alerts and alarms. And so I always find it funny when I hear you ask on the podcast what people have their alarm set to, because what you can do is you can set different alarms. So at like 1:30, I just get like a nudge that's like, hey, your blood sugar is going up a little bit. Mm-hmm. At 160, it's a little bit more of a poke. And then at like 190, my phone starts vibrating like crazy. And it's like, hey, your blood sugar is really going up. You should do something about this. And and then also when the alert goes, it starts with a vibrate. But if you ignore the vibrate for a few minutes, then it starts with like a small chime, and then it gets louder and louder and louder for the alert to make sure that you actually acknowledge it, which is really cool.
Is this a job interview, or did you think I'm going to come on this podcast so I can get a job with one of these companies? Because somebody will hear it, because they're going to hear it. At this point, I think every diabetes company listens to the podcast. So I feel like you're on an extended job interview right now. You don't even know it. Like, why? So I'm fascinated by this part of it. Maybe you have insight in this, and maybe I'll just ramble and you'll say, I don't know, Scott. But when all this is possible right now, I don't understand why. You know what I mean? Like, I was in a meeting with somebody one time and I said, like, I don't know who Ivan is, but find him and hire him. you know what I mean? And you know, I don't know who Edward is, but is there a reason somebody hasn't run in and gotten him and put him in a room and said, here, do the best you can. Let's see what you come up with. You know, like, I don't know why. I mean, I guess big companies have more to consider than I'm absorbing, right? Through the FDA and all this other stuff. But it's just, I mean, what you're talking about sounds like the future, but you're sitting in front of me using it. So
yeah. And a lot of it is just like common sense. Like, it gives you an alert if it thinks you're going to go low within the next 15 minutes. So then when that comes up, I just take, 2 glucose tablets, and then I avoid the low entirely, rather than getting the alert when you go low. And from what I've listened to of the interviews that you and other people have done with like Kevin Sayer from Dexcom, when he answers the questions around the alerts and the apps, it does sound like Dexcom is going to build some of those things into the next version of the CGM. Yeah. And I really do hope that they build in a lot of these types of alerts, because it just makes it so much easier, rather than getting the Dexcom alert that's like incredibly loud when your blood sugar is 130. Just getting a little nudge is so much more convenient and effective.
Yeah, it also doesn't give you that like feeling,
anxiety.
Yeah, geez, this again. And then you look down, you're like, oh, I'm only 130. And it's I take your point. I'm not even pointing out anybody specific. I mean, pump manufacturers, CGM, whoever. It's just if it's all right here, I don't know what. You know what I mean?
So
you know what?
And the funny part is that the code is all written where it's open source. I mean, you can just take the source code and just have that be the Dexcom app.
Yeah,
you don't have to do anything. You can just take it and use it.
Right. Even that part of the world, I don't understand. I for the life of me don't understand like open source. Like, I think it's wonderful, but like my brain doesn't understand why people do it. And because it doesn't lead to, well, I guess it does. It just leads to it so slowly. You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't it be better if you just sat down and wrote out your thing and incorporated it and made it? And then, or does that, like, as soon as you get into regulatory stuff, it stops it, I guess.
I think, because I think that the regulatory stuff, and then also making it safe and effective for everybody. Mm-hmm. So like, I can build this algorithm and test it on myself, but if I'm doing it in a company and, I get low blood sugar, I just treat it, whatever. I don't care. But if a company gives somebody low blood sugar, then it's like, well, what are you guys doing? This is terrible.
Right.
And if it falls apart and somebody dies, then the company is dead. It's over for them.
I completely understand.
So they have to be extra safe and cautious when working on all these things.
I'm being two people here. I'm being like 10-year-old me who's like, just do it. And, the rest of me is like, no, I know why this isn't happening. But it's just, it's frustrating. And yet in the diabetes space over the last 8 years, things have moved forward incredibly.
dramatically.
Yeah. You know, just really.
It's amazing having lived through like multiple daily injections and eating a certain amount of carbs at a certain time, to now having this like incredible algorithm.
Yeah.
So the other part that's really cool about the algorithm is that there are no settings in it. There's no insulin sensitivity factor. There's no basal rate. There's no carb count. There's no carb sensitivity factor. It just figures it all out for you.
Mm-hmm.
And all I do is I put in the amount of carbs that I'm eating 20 minutes before. I mean, you still have to like put it in before so it can pre-bolus, but 20 minutes or half an hour before I eat, I put in what I'm eating and the amount of carbs, and then it slowly builds up like a wave of insulin as a pre-bolus, which is really nice.
Yeah.
And then you also get fewer like crashes because it's slowly building up the insulin through multiple doses rather than just like one dose. So I use FIASP, and I would find that if I pre-bolused with the right amount of insulin, it would all hit within like a 15-minute period, half an hour, 45 minutes later.
Mm-hmm.
But the food absorbs over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
So being able to have it slowly build up the wave of insulin makes it a lot more effective.
Arden had 5 Guys the other day, and we went and picked it up, and we left there. I was like, I think I said something like bolus 20 carbs now. And then we drove home, and then we did 40 more. Like, I'm telling you, this meal is
right.
It's got to be 100 at least carbs. And then we did a little more and did exactly what you just said. Like, we created, you know, it sounds like you do listen to the podcast. Like, in my mind, like I'm creating like different timelines of boluses, different, you know, they live on their own plane of existence for me. This one's going to peak here. This one's going to peak here. This one's going to peak here. And that should lay over top of this fat and protein that she's going to see from this food pretty well. That, I'll tell you, that bolus went so well that when it was over, I was stunned by it. Like 4 hours later, I looked at her graph and I was like, huh. Wow. like even I was like, oh God, that's crazy that worked. And then the next day, she has a waffle in the morning, and we did a little bit. And then I said, I was cooking, and I said, hey, bolus 30 more. And then, I don't know, 15 minutes later, she sat down, and I said, okay, we're going to do the rest of the insulin. And she goes, we haven't done any of it yet, just the first bit. And I was like, no, I said, do 30 more. And she goes, I didn't do that. And just not hearing me say that kept her blood sugar 180 for like 4 hours after she ate the waffle. Just missing it in that spot. You know what I mean? It's really something. But yeah, I want this because what you're describing does what I do. And I think there's other things in the world I would do, Edward, if I didn't have to think about this. So it sounds pretty cool, you know?
Yeah. And it's amazing. So machine learning works well when you have a lot of really precise data. Mm-hmm. And there's just so much precise data for diabetes. Like the amount of insulin that a pump gives you, it's just mind blowing how precise it is. I think like the 0.05 units that the Omnipod can give you, I think if you take like a drop of water and slice it up into like 1,000 pieces, that's the size of one of those boluses. So It's like incredibly precise. It's just mind blowing. And then, you know, people are pretty good at counting carbs. So that's pretty accurate. Being able to track your exercise and activity and heart rate and be able to incorporate that. One of the things that I'm really excited for potentially doing this with other people is to be able to factor in things like location. So you've got the GPS on your phone. It knows if you're at school, if you're at work, if you're at home. I mean, I work from home, so It's not really that important for me, but you know, being able to factor in like hormones and menstrual cycle, you could easily just put into the app, like, hey, today's the first day of the menstrual cycle. And then from that, it can figure out, you know, throughout the month, how much more or less sensitive it needs to be based on that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's what we just went through that last week where through the event, Arden didn't need very much insulin. And then when the event ended for like 4 days, her needs were significant. And,
Right.
We track it in a period tracker, but that's just enough for you to go, okay, it looks like the 4 days after need more. And it's, for people who think like all this stuff is just magic, like Arden's insulin sensitivity and needed to be changed. Her basals needed to be changed. Like a lot needed to be changed in those 4 days. And then when it ends, Edward, it's fascinating. Like I watched it end at 4:00 in the morning on the 4th day. It was just, it was like someone walked in a room and was like, oh, who left this switch on? Click. She does not need these settings any longer. And boom, we had to put them all back, stop a low, and then good. It was fascinating.
And that was one of my frustrations with the other Android APS is that algorithms is that on some days I skip breakfast and do intermittent fasting. Some days I'll even skip lunch as well. And then you have to go into it and you have to say, okay, reduce the profile settings and then potentially reduce them further if you skip lunch as well. And needing to do all of that, I just found to be annoying, and it should just be able to figure it out for you.
Right. And the override for Loop, I know we're jumping back and forth between systems, but the override in Loop works for her for lower days, but for higher days, it's just not enough. Like you can't, like you can go 150% on the override and it still doesn't do it. And then there's a moment when you get too high and you're just going to cause a low. And then those are the moments when you're just like, well, I'm just going to open the loop and run it like a regular pump then. And then you inevitably forget that the loop is open. And you're reminded at 3:00 in the morning when you're like, why is her blood sugar low? Oh, we didn't put the algorithm back on, like that kind of stuff. Those things being fixed.
For Android APS, you can disable it for a time period, which is really awesome. You can just say pause it for an hour or pause it for 4 hours.
Yeah.
So then you don't run into that, which is really cool.
It is really, well, listen, it's amazing. And here's the scary part to me, that it's all based on whether people like you find out about it and are interested enough to put effort into it. Because this could literally be like a softball league where one day we all just don't show up for practice and then the team is gone. You know what I mean? Like that could happen. Like it so far hasn't, but it could. What happens if there's
it could.
You know what I mean? Like,
but I mean, I think it's I could see that happening if there's, but I think because people still have diabetes, it's still going to happen.
Yeah. I hope so. I mean, I'm like, what you're saying is exciting to me. That you're interested in it and that you're doing it is fantastic. That you think that the companies are looking at that stuff as well is very cool. And I'll tell you why, even more important, not just because I spoke to her yesterday, but 72-year-old woman using Loop. And one of the questions I had to ask her was, are you worried about the moment when this stops making sense to you? Or that you can't keep track of how this technology works. And if it was a machine learning technology, it would help you later into life because you wouldn't need to know much of anything,
Yeah. Like, I don't know at all how it works. I mean, I know how it all works, but the idea is that the algorithm, it's multiplying so many numbers that you just can't possibly read through it and understand how it works.
Right.
But the magic is that you can see that it's effective because it's saying at the end of the algorithm, it says how accurate it is.
Mm-hmm.
So like right now it says that it's off by like 0.05 on average, 0.05 units on average. Initially when I started the algorithm, it was off by like 0.8 or things like that. But I've seen as I've developed it further that it's gotten more and more accurate, even though I can't sort of crack it open and tell you how the algorithm really works. You can build similar ones that kind of show you that like tree structure that are readable and understandable, which is pretty cool.
But that's not what most people need. What most people, this is where I firmly believe that Omnipod 5 is onto something. They're just like, look, we don't think you want to know this. You know what I mean? Like we want this to work for you and without you having to understand what all these things are. And that's what I'm saying is that
Absolutely.
either you're a person who gets it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why looping and all this hasn't blown up more than it has. Like, it's exciting that, I don't know, 10,000 people have downloaded the Loop app or whatever the number is, but there's like 1.8 million people with type 1 diabetes. So basically none of them have Loop. You know, statistically speaking, what keeps it from blowing up is that you have to understand all this stuff, and that most people either aren't going to have the ability or the time or the inclination. And so if you want it to really grow, it's going to need to, like, you know, steal the line from Steve Jobs, right? It's going to need to just work. And, you know, that's it.
Yeah. So that's actually what I want to do eventually when I make it so that other people can do it. And I've actually done a lot of this for myself as well, just to make it easier, but have it just like automatically, it uploads your data to the cloud trains a new algorithm. It says, hey, this algorithm is this much better. Do you want to accept it? Yes or no? And then you're on your way.
Yeah.
Or even just have it automatically upload the algorithm if it is more effective.
Right. Is there a business way, cool. Maybe you haven't looked into it, but is there a business way where that could be set up and someone could earn a living from it without it being a legal entanglement?
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you start having people give you money for it, it's kind of like a service. And then if they run into any problems, you know, you've been providing this to them, and therefore you are, you know, responsible.
You're liable now. Yeah.
But in the open source, it's just, I'm setting this information out into the world, and take it or leave it. It's up to you.
Because someone needs to, I mean, this is what I figured out from making the podcast. It somehow is completely different and exactly the same. If the podcast is helpful to you, it's because I can treat it like a business. Like, I can make sure that there's an episode there for you when you turn on your phone and you expect it to be there. And the only way I can do that is because I can pay my bills and live my life while I'm making it. And the only way, and the way I found around, and I didn't want to charge people, because not only do I not want to take money from people, I very badly don't want to take money from people, but I also know that the amount of people who would be willing to give money to it probably wouldn't be enough so that my wife wouldn't make me go get a job, right? So like, so I thought, all right, well, I'll take advertising. But you can't take advertising until you have numbers that are big enough to support advertising. So as much as this might just seem like a podcast to you, I've had to put a number of different structures in place and will them into existence and make them popular enough to support the next step to get you to the content that would help you. And this is the same problem. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think with the open source community, it's like, I could have never done what I've done with the machine learning stuff and building my own algorithm if Android apps didn't exist on its own previously. I wouldn't have had the time and the effort to build out all of the foundational pieces to then build on top of it. So it's all like just building on top of what other people have done.
And my point is,
and that's, I think, the magic to it.
Yeah. And that's, it is, but the way to make it faster is if all those people could have drawn some sort of a salary from it and put their entire 8 hours a day. Like, I'm assuming this is something you do when your kids go to bed. You know what I mean? Right. So
yeah, when they go to bed and they're not awake.
Yeah.
They don't wake up screaming. Then
like, think about it. Edward's got to put his kids to bed. Then he's got to look at his wife for the nod. The nod's not there. And then he's like, all right, I guess I'll work on the Android APS a little more. I want Edward up in the morning at 8 a.m. with a cup of coffee in his hand, working for 8 hours, 10 hours on it. I want 5, 10, 20 people doing that. And then all of a sudden, here we go. And what are we really talking about?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how much money would you really have to generate every year to pay a small band of people to do that? It wouldn't be overwhelming. Somebody just it's the situation where I'm not calling anybody out, but I'm using them as an example. Like, I don't know how Helmsley doesn't hear this conversation and wrangle up 10 people and be like, here, look, how much do you make a year? Well, you work for us now. Go make this, go do this thing. I mean, they support companies when they do it, But then the minute you support the company, you get caught up in the red tape, and then it slows
Yeah, I
down.
think that there are potentially ways that they could get around it. Like if Omnipod just built the pods and they just built the pump, but the pump and the pods, they're open to any algorithm, and then they just provide, and then they work with people who build the open source algorithm, and they publish the algorithm for free, and then it's easy for people to connect the dots. Then they make their money selling the pods.
Yeah. And then
people use the pods because of the open source that they release.
Right. And then that started to happen with Tidepool as an example. But then Tidepool seems like it got sucked right into the machine. And now, like, I mean, it feels like it was 2 years ago where they're like, look what we're going to do. And I'm like, it's 2 years later. My daughter's using three different versions of Loop since then. You know, like, so it's the time that bothers me. And I know, there's got to be a way to get around that, is all I'm saying. At least to
and that was kind of how I got here, was that I thought the 630G was going to come out and it was going to be amazing, and then a few years later they're going to have, you know, an algorithm that is just night and day so much better. And so by the time I build something, you know, there's going to be something incredible by the time I do that.
Yeah.
But 630G was good, and it was really effective for me, but it's just the rate of innovation and release is just too slow. And that was how I then ended up building my own algorithm and stuff like that.
And even the idea that something might be coming could be holding back other people like you who are like, I could probably make an improvement to this. Anyway, I'm not, listen, I'm grateful for all the stuff. It's amazing. You know what I mean? Like, it's without these companies, I remember what it was like. It wasn't a lot of fun. So,
yeah,
you know, and
I've seen people's graphs on Facebook and things from Omnipod 5, and it really is fantastic. And, you know, for most people, that's maybe just good enough.
Right.
And, you know, it provides excellent control, and, you know, maybe that's good enough control that, you know, you're going to run into the same long-term health issues that other people do. Like, on average, people maybe get their knee replaced when they're, you know, 75 or whatever. And if you have control through Omnipod 5, you're just as likely to get your knee replaced at 75 or things like that.
Which is good news, because it means you're alive at 75 and you need your knee replaced. Yeah. Yeah. Listen, it's amazing. I love having these conversations. It's great. Is there anything, I mean, I'm out of my element here. So did I not bring up anything I should have?
No, I don't think so.
Nice. You have notes in front of you?
I do have some notes. Oh. I wrote down a few things. I even built an Excel chart of my A1Cs over the years.
Well, let's not waste it. What have they been?
So I downloaded the data from LabCorp. I wish I had it when I was diagnosed, but it only goes back to 2012. Mm-hmm. So it was in like the 7s, the high 7s. And then in 2016, when I started on the 630G, it dropped down below 7 for the first time. And then it was still in the high 6s, but then eventually got down to like the lower 6s. Yeah. And then there's just a dramatic drop at the end when I started using the Android APS. Down to 5.6.
5.6 is about where you sit?
Yeah, so that's where I am right now. I think that so that was before, the last A1C that I had was before using the machine learning algorithm that I built. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to see what it'll be with the machine learning algorithm.
Do you have any insight through Clarity or something like that where it might be?
So I think it's probably going to be very similar. I want it to be lower. And I think that I can make it lower. Mm-hmm. Right now, the big benefit of it is not having any settings and having it be more dynamic and less less manual overrides and input.
Well, yeah, that sounds much better. Do you eat a certain kind of diet?
No.
No.
So with young kids, sometimes, I have a Pop-Tart or half a Pop-Tart for breakfast, which I love. There's a great quote in one of your episodes where you're like, Pop-Tarts are poison, which I think is very correct, especially when it comes to diabetes. It just like shoots your blood sugar through the roof. And then, but in general, we eat pretty healthy. Lots of vegetables. But I eat pasta. I don't restrict myself in any way.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent to know.
Some days I do intermittent fasting. For like the health benefits.
Yeah.
There's some really amazing science out of like Harvard and some other places around extending lifespan. And one of the effective ways to do it is to do intermittent fasting, which is really cool.
Yeah. I haven't been like precision careful about it recently, like this time to this time. But in general, I have a pretty short eating window in the course of every day. And I think it's I can see a major benefit from it just on how my body weight stays. I'm not necessarily eating like Jenny. And if keeping that window shorter stops me from gaining weight, if I expand the window, my body starts to hold on to weight. It's really interesting. And I do want to pay more attention to it. It's tough because we're in a really weird time right now, Edward, where a lot of people have opinions about things and you don't know if their opinions are rooted in any kind of, like, you know what I mean? Like it's so funny because I'm about to like, I guess what I'm going to say is going to make it sound like I could be in that group too. And I understandably could be, but like I have a podcast, so I know how to make my voice on the internet and I know how people can find it. The podcast has grown the way it has and it's existed the way it has, I believe, because what people learned from it ended up being valuable and they told somebody else. But I don't know if I look for intermittent fasting podcasts, I'll find 25 of them. I don't know what those people know or what they don't know. And it's the same even with simple things. Like I want to do more content about just like vitamin supplementation, but how do you find somebody who knows what they're talking about, who's not a crackpot or just trying to pimp their own
and how do you know
thing?
that they're not a crackpot?
Exactly. And
that's the challenge.
Yeah. And when you talk about intermittent fasting, the same thing comes to my head that some people are going to hear that and go, oh yeah, sure. You know what I mean? Or I'm sure that's the feeling people get when I had somebody tell me the other day, they stood up at an event and they were like, who listens to the Juicebox podcast? There's a bunch of people there with type 1 diabetes. And I thought this was going to be a story about how they all did. And it was not many of them, and so the person starts like expanding on why they think they should listen to the podcast. And he said that at the end, a guy came up to him and said, I mean, I'm not going to listen to that, man. It just sounds like you were doing a sales pitch. And the guy's like, no, he's like, I believe in it. Like, you should try it. And so how do you know what I mean? How do you make that leap? Anyway, there's no answer to that statement. It's just, we're in a time where anybody can espouse their opinions. And it's easy for other people to get to them. And how do you pick who's who? Because I've had people come up to me, they're like, I know about supplements. You start talking to them, like, I think you think that there are spaceships coming to get us. Like, so I don't know how to take you on vitamin D right now, So anyway.
Yeah. So personally, I like finding stuff that's more like research based and like and even sometimes reading the research. But it takes a lot of time to do that. And then it's amazing how often like research is just done terribly, terribly bad. Mm-hmm. There's this fantastic book about pregnancy, and it's called Expecting Better. And it goes into a lot of like the deep dives into a lot of the research around pregnancy. And one of the fantastic things was they recommend, not drinking when you're pregnant. And I'm not don't take this as medical advice, sure. But the book then talks about how in some of the studies, the people that they studied were drinking, but the people who like admitted to drinking in the study also had a number of other really bad complications, like doing heroin or crack or things like that, probably would conflate the results. And so it's amazing how even like research with the best intentions can still be done poorly. And just because you publish some paper doesn't mean that it's valuable. And so it's really hard to sift through that and find the right answer.
Makes me think about during the height of COVID when you couldn't make a turn on the internet without somebody telling you like just zinc and vitamin D. And I'm like, listen, there's no doubt I should probably have a certain level of zinc in my system and a certain level of vitamin D in my system. But they would say it like, that's all you need. That COVID, it just, vitamin D, keep your vitamin D up, you'll be fine. I'm like, how, what? And can you prove that? I heard it. and that ends up being the problem is that someone says it and then people start repeating it. And then before you know, It's a rule. And you're like, wait, what? Like, did anybody look into this? And, it's just very interesting. I'm not saying even that, maybe zinc and vitamin D did stop COVID. I have absolutely no idea. I just don't know how to believe any of it is my bigger problem. So, I want to ask you one last question before I let you go. And I have you way too long. I apologize. Still with the system you're using right now, you still have to pre-bolus your meals, right?
So I don't actually bolus, but you still have to put in the carbs at least 20 minutes beforehand. And then it will bolus on its own.
Yeah.
Sometimes if it's like there's safety restrictions, if my blood sugar is dropping or below the target and things like that, it will be conservative when bolusing. And so I still will pre-bolus then because I know that even though it's dropping, the food is going to make it go up. And so then I still pre-bolus.
Yeah. But I just want people to understand that even when we're talking about something that sounds as futuristic as what you've talked about today, they still have a responsibility.
There's still, yeah, exactly. So the French company that I talked about, the CEO of that company has given a few interviews, and they have said that, if you don't pre-bolus and if you don't even bolus your meals, you can still get reasonable results. Like it's just going to take a while for the insulin to catch up with the food is the reality. Yeah. But I mean, there's still things that, any algorithm just can't predict.
Right. There's a company, I assume they're still working on it, but it feels like it's 10 years ago now. I'm sure it wasn't that long. And they said they were going to have an algorithm where you could just tell it I'm having a large meal, a small meal, a medium-sized meal. And I don't know whatever came of that.
So that's interesting. That's one thing that I want to try and do is see if I just use purely the description of the meal to see if that can be sufficient. Because usually when I eat pizza, I eat about the same amount of pizza. And when I eat a bowl of cereal, it's roughly the same bowl of cereal.
Yeah.
So it should be sufficient. And then sort of the next mind-blowing idea would be to take a picture of it. You just take pictures of your food, and there already are algorithms that can tag food in pictures. So you just take the tags out of the picture, and Google can already tell you if a picture contains a hamburger or a chair or, a salad. Yeah. And so you could just use that to then predict how much insulin to give.
That'd be pretty amazing if one day you just held your phone up over your plate and got insulin for it. That'd be insane.
I think that there is an app that tries to estimate the number of carbs based on doing that.
There is, because they tried to buy ads on the show one time, and I was like, let me try the app. And then I tried it, and I was like, no, thank you. Didn't work out exactly how I was hoping. But
I think if you did it like if you trained it on like a per person basis, because most people eat pretty similar meals most of the time.
Right.
And like humans are creatures of habit, so you can learn those habits.
Yeah. Well, that I believe in. Trust me, I don't know anything about science or machine learning, but I knew to say that years ago. And I think the first time I said it to Jenny, she was like, what now? And I'm like, people eat the same things, right? And she's like, yeah, I guess so. And I was like, yeah, it's not like you're like, you know what I mean? It's not like you're having frog legs one day and a McDonald's cheeseburger the next day. You probably live in a certain existence. By the way, it was Ed Domino that I was thinking of. And that's just back in 2014. I think it's at Boston Labs. I forget, but he was working on, I forget what he calls it even. Some sort of bionic pancreas was what the phrasing they were using back then. But it's one of those things, like, I have no idea where that is in the process. It's 8 years later, and I haven't really heard much about it. But I think that he was the one who was saying, or maybe it was the other company. That's the other problem, is that sometimes these people have ideas, then they incorporate, and then suddenly, and I'm not saying this about anybody specific, but then suddenly raising money to keep the company going becomes the company's job. You know what I mean? And you get in that situation.
And trying to roll it out just becomes so difficult.
Yeah.
The other thing that I found, though, is that, so people are creatures of habit, but for me at least, we eat the same meals, but just not often enough where I've forgotten by the time we come back around to the same meal. Mm-hmm. So, we'll have pizza from this great pizza place near us, but we only eat it, I don't know, every 2 months or something like that. And I don't remember exactly what I gave myself 2 months ago.
Sure. Yeah.
But an algorithm can remember that and learn that for you.
Right. And you can say, you're even saying that at some point in the world, it might be able to say, I know you're at Domino's right now. And you said you had pizza.
I mean, you can track your location on your phone.
Right.
Within Domino's versus Pizza Hut versus school or whatever. Yeah. And you can use that to predict how much insulin to give.
Hey, I want to give whoever Omnipod hired to do their search engine optimization, I want to give them a big shout out, because I Googled Ed Domino insulin pump and I got a return back for Omnipod 5 at the top. So somebody's doing their job extra well over there. And
it could be that, or it could just be Google monitoring everything and recommending ads for you.
Pushing you to ads, yeah.
Because you've gone to an Omnipod site before.
Oh, and here it is. He was calling his pump iLet from Beta Bionics. ILET. Yeah.
Interesting.
Delayed by the FDA in mid to late 2021. This could be delayed by the FDA, it says. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, listen, I was drugged into the world of looping by a lovely woman named Gina, who just wanted to hear more about it on the podcast. And I can't thank her enough. I think it's made a significant improvement in my daughter's life. And as to be perfectly honest, I don't see a world. We've used Omnipod 5 and it was absolutely terrific. But, we went back to loop after a few months, and we really understood. I understand Omnipod 5 backwards and forwards now, but Do you still use an orange link? Yeah, but I heard there's a better one now.
So that's what we're using Dash, though. Using Omnipod Dash, you don't have to carry that around anymore. So it's just carrying around your phone, and it's fantastic.
So Edward, if you would do me a favor of keeping in mind that you and I are recording something that people won't hear for 6 months, so that I have to keep the timeline of my podcast intact and keep this to yourself for the next 6 months till your episode comes out. So Arden used Omnipod 5 for a couple of months. It was exactly what I expected it to be. I learned how to use it. I understand how to use it. And she said to me, can I go back to loop? Because she didn't want to carry the controller for the Omnipod 5. She loved having loop on her phone, right? And it's interesting because it wasn't about the care to her. It was about the functionality, right? So what I did was,
because you have to carry the controller. I
thought about that. She wanted to carry the controller. She didn't want to have to carry an extra thing. We have, listen, everybody should be getting enough. I have enough Eros pods to last us for a little while. Okay. So when she went from Eros to Omnipod 5, and then we left Omnipod 5, I did not go back to Eros pods. I went back to Dash pods. And I'm going to try, so we're going to use up the Eros pods we have. And then by then, I think the Dash version of Loop will be ready and out of beta. And then I'm going to translate her to that. I'm thinking around the holidays that should probably happen. So she's going to go off to college on Loop. And we're actually sending her with the Omnipod 5 stuff as her backup. In case her algorithm crashes and we can't do something about it from a distance, because she's going away pretty far to school. But yeah, that's the next step, is I think looping with Dash for us. I would imagine
Yeah,
by the time someone hears this, we're doing it, is my expectation.
It's really great being able to use the Dash without needing to carry around anything else.
When I bring this up to Jenny, she keeps bringing up that she thinks that you can't change the impact time in the Dash version yet of Loop. I don't know. You probably don't pay attention to Loop, but in the you know what I mean? The ERS version, you can say, I think this meal is going to hit over 3, 2, 5, 6 hours. And at the moment, I guess you can't do that in Dash, but I'm hoping somebody adds that to it.
Interesting. I wouldn't have expected that to have any impact because like the pump, at least in Android APS, because it supports so many pumps, the pump like integration is its own separate piece from all of the rest of the algorithm stuff. So the algorithm should continue to work no matter which pump you plug in to use.
Yeah, I think specifically what Jenny heard was that the Dash version of Loop did not have that ability yet, and she was hoping that somebody would put it in. But it does agree. It's a big deal because you can make a bolus at 3 hours, and this thing's like, all right, well, you're good, but you're looking at a blood sugar that's 170. If you just go in, it's one of the amazing things about Loop that I missed with Omnipod 5 is that I could go back in and change the parameters of that bolus from 2 hours ago and say, hey, you know what, this is actually hitting over 4 hours now. And boom, here's how much insulin I think you should put in for that. And you can't edit your boluses in Omnipod 5. So once you put them in, they're in. That's one of the things I love about Loop the most is being able to go back and edit a previous bolus.
I do think that for Omnipod 5, they will roll it out to more phones pretty quickly. I mean, so pretty quickly would be like over the next 6 months to a year or something like that they're going to add more and more phones.
There's also the last part of this is I want her to be on a retail system. I want it to get to the point where I'm like, yeah, put that on. It does these 3 things we need it to do. For me, the truth is that Android APS, Loop, Tandem, Control IQ, and Omnipod 5, these are not things that are competing with each other. They're not apples to apples situations. Like I think Control IQ and Omnipod 5 are, similar. And I think Loop and Android APS are similar. I don't like somebody asked me like, are you going to compare the two? And I was like, that's just, there's just no reason to do that. They're not the same thing.
Yeah. They each have like pros and cons of like tighter control versus more effort and work to set it up. And no, there's a complete trade-off. So many different things.
If with Omnipod 5, if you could target a little lower, and if it would be more aggressive on a rising blood sugar, I think, we would have held out until the phone was available. But the problem is that Arden's a young girl. She's hormonal, and we were having to leave the algorithm to stop some of these big rises. But having said that, I do that in Loop too. It's not like Loop was magical with the blood sugars. I would say that the biggest difference is that Loop holds Arden steady at a lower number. Like that was it.
Especially like overnight and stuff like that.
Especially overnight. Other than that,
85.
Yeah. Other than that, they were very similar for us.
Yeah.
So,
but needing to carry around a phone and an extra controller, I would imagine would be a pain.
When I opened the Omnipod 5 box and the controller came out, Arden said, and this is a quote, "What the f*** is that?" And I said,
that is fantastic.
That's the controller. And she goes, "Oh, no." And I said, "No, Arden, we're gonna use this and we're gonna try it." But yeah, it was just, she's like, "I don't want to carry another thing." And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, and that was a big deal to her. Like, so I'm like, all right. So
yeah, I totally get that. So, now I just carry my phone, my wallet, and 2 glucose tablets in a little like pill container that I found on Amazon. And that's all I carry with me.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's what you're looking for. Is you're looking for less impact. They're all going to get there. I mean, I can't tell you, I have no trouble suggesting Omnipod 5 to people. I think it was terrific. It was slightly less customizable than I was accustomed to. And she was carrying another thing. So who knows if that app was already on her, like ready for her phone, she might not have ever brought it up, you know?
Yeah.
So, cause she doesn't use the functionality in Loop. Like, you know, it's not like Arden's like, oh, I should probably change my insulin sensitivity because it's after my period. I tell her that's what's happening and she goes, oh, okay. That's why I loved what you were talking about so much, because as interactive as Arden is, she's not that person. You know what I mean? And as she becomes an adult and I get less involved, I imagine that means her blood sugars are going to go up if she doesn't have something that's going to think for her like that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it makes so much sense for the algorithm to just take care of it for you.
It does to me.
It has all the data. Why can't it do it?
Yeah, especially after talking to you, it does to me. So, all right, let me say thank you very much. I appreciate you doing this. Of course, we're going to thank Edward for spending so much time explaining all of this to us. And I actually spoke to him last night for a second. His A1C, last one, 5.5. And this episode was recorded 6 months ago. So it seems like things are working pretty well for Edward and his choice of insulin delivery. I want to thank US Med and remind you that we get our supplies from US Med, and you could too. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. Links in the show notes. Links at Juicebox Podcast, the US Med, Touched by Type 1, and all of the sponsors. Since this one went long, I'll just tell you, check out the private Facebook group where you can meet people like Edward. Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook, private group. You'll love it. And goodbye. Thanks for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. It won't be as long as this one.